music is an absolutely essential part of everyday life, probably for every human being on the planet. And psychologists and anthropologists and so forth have studied why that may be the case, probably because language has musical properties. And indeed, there have been arguments over the generations as to whether music preceded language or vice versa, but it's a fundamental part of human expression. It's something that enables us to communicate and indeed to operate, to function as human beings. But it goes beyond that because it allows us to express ourselves in ways that are more powerful than words alone could achieve.
Well, the way you love me, no free sugar down.
Our Research Centre for Musical Performance as Creative Practice was launched in 2009. Its principal remit is to study live music making in a range of conditions and contexts, cultures and traditions. We're based at the University of Cambridge with partnerships at Oxford, King's College London and Royal Holloway, and we also have associate links with the Guildhall School of Music and Drama and the Royal College of Music. Our 5 projects are in fact the meat and potatoes, the heart of our work, but in addition to that we're very pleased to host a range of visiting fellows and a performance studies network, the membership of which spans the 4 corners of the globe. Our 5 projects are particularly interesting, looking at performance in different contexts such as the teaching studio, the rehearsal studio, on stage, behind the scenes and even in the mind of the individual performer. One of our projects is called Shaping Music in Performance, and it looks at the ways in which performers visualize or imagine music in terms of shape. I myself think of music as a kind of topographical process. You could almost run your hand over the surface of it. And our project, Shaping Music in Performance, is looking at issues such as that in a range of different ways. The study of the body in performance is a fairly new area, and lots of work is now being done on this because, of course, performance is not just about music, it's about the projection of music, and part of that has to do with the way in which we understand the music we're playing or singing in physical terms, and also as listeners, the way in which it comes across to us through physical gestural properties. Another of our projects is looking at how large ensembles put together the interpretations of music that they eventually will perform. And some of the communication processes that take place in rehearsal are tacit or gestural and so forth. It's not always the case that performers say exactly what they're going to do. And so the project in question really looks at how such communication takes place and the way in which, again, these decisions are reached across large groups of people, whether with or without a conductor, whether verbally or not. This network has been running a series of international conferences, workshops, seminars and performance events such as masterclasses, as well as the other talk and play events that are our hallmark. These allow people to see what lies behind and underneath the act and the art of performance in ways they might never have imagined. Another of our projects focuses on performer-composer collaborations in the definition of new music. It might be thought that a composer composes the music, writes it down, and then it goes off into the world and performers make of it what they will. In our project, we're looking at how the dialogues between composers and performers might take place, take shape as new music is being produced and a defining performance achieved.
The particular question that this project wanted to grapple with was the very direct sense of creativity that is involved in a composer working with one or more performers in the sort of the real moment of making a piece of music come into existence for the first time, rather than the longer process of reinterpreting the music over its larger lifetime. We've been working with the violinist Peter Shepherd-Skerved, who is both a solo performer and also is the leader of the Kreutzer String Quartet, and he has been working with a new piece composed for him by the Cambridge composer Jeremy Thurlow, a piece for solo violin and laptop computer. This was a piece that we commissioned with funds from the project, which was performed first in Cambridge in the early part of 2012 and has had a number of subsequent performances both in London and in Oxford. And a really very extraordinary project was one in which we investigated a new piece written for an ensemble called His Majesty's Sackbuts and Cornets, which is a group that specialises mostly in the performance of 16th and 17th century sackbut and cornet music, but who decided on the 30th anniversary of the formation of this group to commission a living composer to write music for them for the first time in the whole history of this ensemble. So actually a colleague here in Oxford, a member of the music faculty here in Oxford called Martin Harry, wrote a wonderful new piece for them. It's a whole series of short movements that together constitute, I think, more than an hour of music. And again, we extensively documented the whole process by which they learnt this new music and actually made a CD recording of it. So although it used rather conventional forces, it was actually quite unconventional music written for this kind of historical musical ensemble.
Our project's called Creative Learning and Original Musical Performance, and what we're studying in this project is what it is about learning music that can be creative and how do we learn to be creative. Both the learning process and the goal come into consideration. We've been conducting our research in association with the Guildhall School of Music and Drama and the Royal College of Music, and my two research fellows on the project have gone and done field work with staff and students from both of these institutions. They've conducted interviews, they've issued questionnaires, and they've put a camera in lessons so that the lessons in question can be observed and then studied. And some very interesting things have come out of that. By giving footage of the filmed lessons to the teachers and students separately, you invite to comment on what is interesting and creative about a particular lesson or particular passages in the lesson. This allows them to determine what they think was important, and the findings are absolutely fascinating because it's not necessarily what we as researchers might have imagined.
As woodwind, I think that something like that happens later. This is strings.
We followed one-to-one lessons with a camera. We put a camera in one-to-one lessons in several in a row, and then the teachers and the students looked at the footage and they decided when they in the lesson felt that they've learned something that enables them to be their own musician, more or less, to either to learn something about the piece that they didn't realise before, or their own performance, their own playing and things like that. In their reflection, suddenly it opens up a totally different door to a musical world or an inside world, how they understand the piece, how they understand themselves as performers that you don't see. So that was very, very interesting, I think, to get into performers or into students and also teachers' heads.
Yeah, how's it feel? Yeah, cool. Trust yourself.
Well, the filming in itself, as Miriam's just said, is to us not the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing is using that filmed footage to get the teachers and the students to reflect on what they were doing and what they were thinking while they were doing it. So it's that combination of the filmed footage and the interview process that is interesting to us. And we've used that approach to look at the way that students practice and prepare a piece as well. So we've had another round of video collection, which has been giving just the students the cameras and instructing them to video themselves while they're practicing and preparing a piece.
And there are a few things already quite interesting coming out. Our, at the moment, kind of favourite thing, or favourite student, was a horn student. And when I met him for the interview, most of the video footage he showed me, he was not playing the horn. He was singing, he was whistling, he was playing the piano, he was doing all sorts of things. And that's how he developed his ideas. And then, with his ideas, he went back to the horn and tried it there, and tried to match his idea with his technical ability. But when we look at the diary, he never mentions that. I mean, it shows us two things. First of all, that, or a lot of things. One of the things I think it shows us that this sort of practicing is still not seen as practice. So he didn't think it was, he should be bothered to put it in. And when you look at the research or the literature on practicing, even when they say do mental practice, they mean fingering, they mean all that, not think about the piece.
And this notion of creation in performance is right at the heart of what we're doing. It hasn't been addressed to the extent that one might have expected, and indeed creativity generally is something that's been neglected by scholars, partly because it's so hard to define. Nicholas Cook is producing a book called Music as Creative Practice, which will be a kind of sum total of what our centre is doing. He will draw upon the results from the other 4 projects and then add to it himself to address this question about performance as something that is fundamentally creative, not simply a reproduction of someone else's ideas.
Here, this one.
Oh, yeah.
And only noticed too late that
You were halfway through it.
Yeah.
What did you think, Beth, about the 2 performances?
The second one was definitely different. I don't know if that was because we were thinking about the G's or we were just more comfortable in the room.
I felt you really created a mood and an atmosphere that drew me in. I mean, even though, interestingly, Our research centre on musical performance as creative practice is, to some extent, a predominantly British affair, in that in this country there's been a suspicion, perhaps, of overriding theories and frameworks. There's been a greater flexibility, perhaps, towards answering the kinds of questions that we're engaged in trying to address. And Britain really has been a world leader in musical performance studies. In other parts of the world there's a great deal of interest, and indeed huge achievements have been made. I don't want to underestimate that. But here in this country there's a focus, partly through the vision and support of our funding council, the AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which in our own case has funded 10 years of research into musical performance, as well as a host of projects by other people. I think we're just starting to understand, generally speaking, what lies behind musical performance, and also why it's important to understand what lies behind musical performance. I think many people assume that when a performer gets on stage, they're making music, they're expressing themselves, and they're doing something that may be really quite challenging, but it's sort of taken for granted that they can do it. And by interrogating performers in a kind of constructive and mutually productive way, we actually learn more about what lies behind it in terms of preparation, the ideas that they have, the way in which they actually shape the music themselves. We learn a great deal about what performers think, and thus have a capacity to learn about how we might think about what performance is and why it affects us the way it does.